Tradition for many alludes to a notion of practicing the habits of our ancestors arbitrarily. This usually, and one may add, even rightfully causes a feeling of discontent in the contemporary mind. Whilst tradition finds itself manifested via the reality of habituation and ritual, the tradition itself transcends this and is a reflection of a primordial and immutable reality beyond all contingent being. Therefore, we take the meaning of tradition to be the instantiation of the primordial principle of being within the mundane realm of becoming, or in more Christocentric language, the Word incarnated in creation. Tradition is the eternal represented in the temporal. Thus we say the rituals and habits which seem arbitrary to the contemporary are shown to be the opposite, and that these contingent representations are done out of respect to the antithesis to the arbitrary, which is the necessary, and only the divine, or the primordial, is necessary. The goal of this video is twofold, that being to uncover what tradition is in the American context and how it ought to be resuscitated. American civilization is often regarded by traditionalists to be in and of itself antithetical to any tradition. It is said that the foundation of America is itself predicated upon anti-traditional doctrines. A traditionalist well read in the school of perennialism may even invoke the notion of America embodying counter-traditional elements through its redefining of what tradition is. That is to say, a thinker of perhaps Guinonian or Evolian persuasion may argue that the established traditions of America are in its proper sense not a tradition at all, but rather a subversive form of it. Further arguments have also been deployed, which follow a genealogical formation. The perspective of a political reactionary would have it be known that America's foundation is liberalism, an ideology birthed by the French Revolution, which is itself the negation of traditional European society. This too is supplemented by the fact that America's essence is defined by its rejection of the Anglo-monarchy. Without this rejection, an American state as we know it today would not exist, therefore making it the superessential reality necessary to the nation. The American Democratic Republic is modeled in some way after ancient Mediterranean statecraft. However, it is much more libertine in its modus operandi, in the sense that it expands the power of voting to all citizens of all races and genders. In ancient Greek democracy, voting rights were limited to male citizens who were born of the first aristocratic population of Athens, therefore making it not only sexually exclusive, but also ethnically. Certainly, a similar situation was present in America in its early foundation when it was still not as deviated from traditional inclinations. However, over time, these quickly degenerated away to the point nearly all forms of traditional exclusivity have been dissolved. Religion in the context of the American tradition is, in its essence, Christian with a heavily Protestant inclination. There are, however, other sects of the Christian religion present, mostly Catholicism. Whilst the theological and historical distinctions do matter in essence, the ethic driving the American spirit is one of Christian salvation and a providential plan that often finds its way into the self-conception of the American nation as a whole. This too is vital and necessary to the American identity, as it is where all values derive and drives the nation to perpetuate itself onward to fulfill its providential destiny. However, it can often be dwarfed by liberal notions of freedom and autonomy as the highest good. Looking for a concrete tradition in America finds itself to be an intellectual quagmire for anyone of a traditional disposition. It seems as if the nation is itself bound to be anti-traditional, by essence, therefore making it obsolete to even continue the search for such a thing. We must concede that America is indeed from its founding an anti-traditional society. It does possess the elements which would colloquially fall under this category. However, we must not prematurely conclude that such a reality condemns America and its survival. In the following sections of this video, we will address a solution to the rather unique situation we Americans find ourselves within. The life of a nation is defined by its race life, that is to say, the racial constitution of its inhabitants and especially its elite. The existence of a root race in America is the cause of ethnic multiplicity within itself. The root race within America is the European race, broadly speaking. In particular, we find that the pioneering race was of Germanic origin, and the elite was a subset of this, being Saxon. These Germanic roots form the foundation of America in the north and then spread across the nation. The process of ethnogenesis occurred, creating distinct identities across the North American continent. Later on, after the foundation for America had been laid, Europeans from other parts of Europe migrated, then once again formed a new American ethnogenesis. America has now become, in a racial sense, a pan-European state. Without its essence as European and its foundation as Anglo-Germanic, the nation of America ceases to have being. Not only has there been an ethnogenesis of Americans as such, there has also been variations of that ethnicity across the continent, as was mentioned hitherto. The variations of the Yankee, Southerner, and Westerner are furthermore supplemented by newer European arrivals who add new micro-ethnicities which also undergo their own process of ethnogenesis, distinguishing themselves from their previous European root nation. We see this plainly in the distinction between Irish Americans, Italian Americans, in relation to ethnic Irish and Italians. The diaspora undergoes the creation of a new form. This of course also applies to the presence of other races in the nation, most notably the Negro population, which also has its own culture. The presence of non-white races within America which have formed their own ethnic identity raises the question as to whether or not these races are truly American. They are not American. They are something which exists as its own thing, veiled in the infinitesimal shadow of Europeanness. The nation has always maintained that the American identity was one of racial Europeans, as was stated in the 1790 Naturalization Act, which called for those of white origin. Only those of white stock could become American in any meaningful sense, and we wish to maintain this foundation. Without this, we lose our identity, as if anyone can become American, then to be American means nothing whatsoever. An identity is defined by what it is, and also defined by its limitations. The metaphysical law of identity states that a thing must be what it is, and not something else, or else it is not conforming to its identity. Without limitation, you cease to have identity. Definition, that is, something to be defined, quite literally means to make it distinct from everything else. Identity requires distinction, and distinction is differentiation from another. When a thing is a thing, and therefore distinct, as all things are, it has limitations, which is what makes it what it is. X is always X, and not Y or not X. Applying this logical and likewise metaphysical principle to the American identity, we see that it loses its ability to be exclusive, therefore its ability to have differentiation. We then cease to have this identity as such. The American identity, in order for it to have its identity, must not cease to maintain its exclusivity, or else it is nothing at all. Your home is your home because it belongs to you exclusively. If anyone could walk into it and live there, then it is no longer your home, as it has lost its existence through no longer being in your hands, and exclusively therefore distinctly. If America loses its white population, it is then simultaneously losing itself, since to be American is to be white. Which is why any notion of so-called Native Americans that does not refer to its white population ought to be considered obsolete. The Injun population had no self-conception of a unified people, let alone an American one. The American identity finds its birth in the European. The Injun population was at war with itself. We came here as another tribe amongst the many, and we conquered and unified the lands for the betterment of our people. Certainly, it came at the expense of the Injun, but it is not as if they are not willing to sacrifice each other and us for the betterment of themselves. Violence did not find itself foreign to them, nor seldom, nor did it to us. What distinguishes us from them is that we just did it better. The situation regarding tradition is dire and even existential, but we give no quarter to those who say it is impossible to overcome or resurrect. Thus, we propose a solution which takes its form in an ideal coupled with a pragmatic method of reaching that ideal. All ideals become sterile when not supplemented by some form of praxis, and all forms of pragmatism become undefined when not in service of a higher ideal. Since pragmatism is simply the art of finding the best way to achieve a goal, it finds itself inseparable from the ideal, since the pragmatic only exists in relation to the realization of an ideal. Which is why, if we take ourselves to be serious about solving the problem at hand, we must address both accordingly. The ideal is a strong America that maintains and elevates its white racial body. This America will embody primordial values which will find themselves present in the society. It will embody these values as all traditional societies did, yet it will be phenotypically different from societies of the past. It will be paternalistic in essence and anti-parliamentary, as it will seek to reflect the will of God on earth through governance with proper jurisprudence. It will not seek to reflect the will of the people in the crude sense of giving the masses what they want. The masses often do not want what is morally correct, and thus must be guided by a higher ethical ideal that will be embodied in the organic state. The state that is above the people, yet united and one with them, just as God is above creation, yet present and united with it, not in essence, but through the act of the divine will. The new American state will only be democratic insofar as democratic is taken to mean that which is good for the people, which, as mentioned hitherto, is not equivalent to what they want necessarily. The economy must be organized in such a way that the various interests of the sectors of society are met and harmonized in the higher interests of the nation as a whole. Any interest of a particular sector that deviates from the interests of the nation as a whole will be crushed by the state. Thus we propose a form of corporatism, which is to say, the submission of all interest to that of the paternalistic state that embodies providence. Large-scale industries and banking will be centralized, and the development of technology will be under provision of the ethical state. Within the state there will be corporate bodies that hold positions of power yet subject to the will of an autarch, a sovereign leader. The corporate bodies will be part of the state, and advocate for their respective interests, whether it be labor, agriculture, etc. These bodies will have input and will be sustained by the state in order that they cannot subvert the state. All large-scale industries will be owned by multiple people who will be loyal to the nation and the state. The state's interest will triumph over private interest, since the state is sustained by the society as a whole and cannot exist without it, yet neither can society exist without the state. Therefore, the interests of the state will be one with those of the people, and must have the power to override any subversion, and must have access to all resources, yet give permission to certain entities loyal to the state to have access. As the way things stand now, this project is very far from being finished or even started. What Americans must do is build intentional communities populated by whites who maintain their heritage and customs. We must form strongholds and from here build ourselves up and try to influence society. Acquire our own land, build our own neighborhoods, but do not retreat. Still interact, just do so in a more organized manner. Rome was started as a small city-state and expanded through slowly building itself, so can we. As it stands now, modern infrastructure is shredding birth rates, especially within cities, so staying outside these places and allocating resources to new communities is a good idea. That being said, we ought to try and influence the cosmopolitan elite as much as possible and still engage with the cultural powerhouses. We ought to become nepotistic and advocate for ourselves because nobody else will.